Alright everyone, we start off today with a bitching about another legacy media dog whistle for censorship. This one, of course, coming again from Oliver Darcy from CNN. He's the main gadfly from their network, at least in the Twitter sense. They've got a whole motley crew of goofballs there that all call for censorship anyway, but he's I guess, more tech literate, more into the Twitter game and stuff. Some pundits and producers and stuff, they're more just involved with the network itself, so TV, newsprint, whatever it happens to be, depends on the company. Others have really embraced the social media thing more. What's common across all of them, this is the case mostly for Fox 2 with a couple of exceptions, they're not embracing new tech. They viscerally hate the fact that there's an upswelling of independent media and missing link media, which will be pertinent here with OAN, One American News, Rebel News, and some of these groups that have risen up specifically because there's no representation of anything outside of the neolib, neocon orthodoxy that's promoted by the so-called journalists in the corporate media. Now, CNN, of course, its parent firm is a multinational, globalistic, multi-billion-dollar entity. You have Oliver Darcy totally coincidentally rambling about OAN around the exact same time that a whole bunch of other groups get them canceled from DirecTV. I don't know that it harms OAN because networks like that, the missing link media, including the leftoid ones, they have more of a hardened core audience that follows them cross-platform, interacts with the content and stuff. And so where you have them on, you know, the fucking on-demand services, or certainly on like old-style newsprint or something, if they get canceled, doesn't really affect them as much. This has vexed, by the way, the legacy media. I would like to point something out. And my second video for the day will also be on the topic of big tech, new tech, etc., the upswelling of this independent movement. Over the last half decade, it's been about a half a decade now, these corporations have repeatedly used underhanded and sometimes dubiously legal means to cancel all of their competitors, which is seen as a good thing by so-called enlightened liberals. They don't notice that it's quasi-fascistic in nature. The billionaires and the government got together to cancel a group that we ourselves compete with, but we said that they were extreme, so, you know, it's okay. Despite that, has it actually denigrated these groups, or has it driven them to sites now that are skyrocketing in growth and where they're untouchable, like Rumble or like Substack? Well, the latter. Greenwald's big cahoon on Substack probably makes more than he did before he was forced out at, I can't remember exactly which group he was at before because it's become vestigial. One of those, he's one of the founders of the group. Can't even remember which one it was. The Intercept, I think. They went woke. Now Substack is big. I've got fucking 5,500 people following me on there, and I've only made like 40 articles. OAN probably gets about as much viewership as CNN. CNN's ratings have declined so much they can't even crack into the 7-figure margin per show, despite the fact that they've got this massive multi-billion-dollar budget and hundreds of staff and fucking, they've got the offices, they've got the janitors and accountants and lawyers and all this stuff, and yet they're struggling to keep up with, you know, missing link media sites. It's sort of like the mainline pundits of yesteryear struggle to keep up with people like me half the time, even with smaller audiences than even these uprising networks. Now, link in the description, archived of course, to this particular post that Darcy's making. Keep in mind, if you're watching on YouTube, there will be a pinned comment down below as well. Links in the description also to other video hosting sites that I use because, of course, when you're branching out independently, you have to cast the net wider. And there are networks that actually let me make the videos that I want to make, and YouTube at this point is clearly sided with the CNNs of the world. Rather unfortunate, rather sad, considering it was built by crazy kids who wanted to put up youth fighting sports and Tourette's guy and things of that nature. It was originally for YouTube poop. Now YouTube is becoming poop. Oliver Darcy's hypocrisy here is funny because, like, well, it's amazing. A lot of people won't call OAN out as the propaganda that it is. It's extremist news, essentially. CNN is fake news, though. The hypocrisy, the lack of self-awareness here is staggering. Now, Oliver Darcy might be dumb enough to actually believe his own shtick, and maybe it's not even just that he's being obtuse. I think that some of these pundits and producers from the legacy media actually have gotten high on their own farts so much they believe they're defending democracy or something. Like, they're not even just in it for the money. They honestly believe they're doing the right thing, and that makes them 10 times more dangerous, by the way. The fact is, though, CNN, and Darcy objectively stated this about a month ago, is taking marching orders from the White House. At least in the sense of U.S. economic news, we can prove that CNN and other networks, although they're not all named, are coordinating with the Biden White House to spin economic news. Now, it's hard to spin 7% inflation and botched, underwhelming job numbers and all of the other problems in the United States as a good thing. But they're trying, and they're doing this in coordination with people in the Biden administration. They hold like meetings, say, well, here's the latest inflation numbers. We'd like it if you could cover for us. Here's a couple of ideas about how you can report on this so the American people think that it's good news. And so you get like the last slew of propagandistic psyops articles. It's a new term that people are becoming aware of. It was specifically on shortages. Now, we were told for months by shills that the shortages did not exist. It was a figment of our imaginations using footage from the initial lockdowns of 2020, which is when Trump was president. It was state level, the lockdowns and of ports and truckers and so forth, but you know, there were shortages. People noticed them. There were even some shortages here in the Netherlands. We were told, though, that old footage was being recycled, old pictures, showing shortages that no longer existed. Well, that's a conspiracy theory, they said. Everything's fine now. But the legacy media took up a different line from the grassroots shills. In their AstroTurf attempt, they accidentally, I think, backfired some because they reported, oh yeah, there's shortages. Here's the top reasons why. What was absent from all of these lists? And by the way, all of those lists, despite the ordering and wording, were exactly the same several points, showing coordination, which came from the Biden White House. CNN was part of this. HuffPo and all of these others. What did they blame the shortages on? Well, there's increased demand. Well, there was still some remnant economic damage done, but Biden had nothing to do with it. He was encouraging the lockdowns for almost a year, but it's not really his fault. Here's the reasons why. They blamed everything except for Bidenomics and his pushing of lockdownerism, which didn't end until about a month ago. Well, that's very interesting because, again, other than the wording, they were using the same list. I wonder if it came from one central source. Sort of like the religious studies. Oh, all of these cultures have the same origin story in different forms with a slightly different timeline. Could they possibly be linked? They either got it from one another or there's a central reason why they all spawned the same mythology. This is something that's been debated for centuries within theology, and yet they would rather us assume that the legacy media that can be basically paid to say anything that you want them to doesn't do this. The fact is that OAN does have a political bias, one that they pretty much do not attempt to hide. The idea that OAN is dangerous or extreme, there's something wrong with their propaganda, is prefaced on the same bullshit propagandistic lies we've seen from the legacy media now for a half a decade. Well, they're influenced by the Russians. They're spewing out extremism. Why? Because CNN and their other competitors say that they're spewing out extremism. I think it's more CNN is looking at its crashing ratings to the point where eventually it'll be vestigial. It'll no longer even be solvent necessarily. They're looking at the fact that they're just not cutting it. And instead of saying, what are we doing that's so shitty that people are turning us off? It could be the nonstop false fake news. Let's try to destroy a few competitors. But it won't work. It hasn't. They've been doing this since 2016. Has it worked so far? Their ratings continue to tumble. OAN continues to build steam. Rebel News gets more and more viewers. There's a reason why Rumble now is skyrocketing with growth. I'm approaching 60,000 subscribers on the platform. I only passed 50,000 subscribers late last year. It's been like a month and a half, and I've gained 10,000 new followers on a platform that is maybe 2% the size of YouTube by user base. Meanwhile, YouTube has me dead in the water the entire time. This is a tech issue. This is a media issue. And it's CNN that's spewing the propaganda. It's not OAN. OAN's a biased network. They're all biased. They just happen to have a bias that CNN deems dangerous because they've spent years and years promulgating the big lie, which is that Trump is an insurrectionist. Right-wingers have become more... They're going to rise up in arms and enslave people again. Networks that deviate from whatever Fauci says are going to cause grandma to die. Well, none of these things are true. These are just excuses, by the way. They don't even believe them most of the time. They're excuses to try to stop competitors that are taking their money. That's really what it's about. But the time of the big newsroom thing with seven-figure pundits who have no side hustle at all and are just being paid a salary by globalists that are usually based in China anyway, that era is over. It's not efficient. The internet has effectively rendered the old style of media production obsolete. Newsprint is woefully inefficient. Television is inefficient based on ratings and all the money you have to put into it. They have to suck down the ad revenue from commercials from big corporations. Other networks don't have this problem. Some of them are entirely crowdfunded. It's way, way easier and cheaper. That's why, by the way, CNN and similar groups are constantly cracking down on social media and trying to get them to eliminate the competitors. Because let's say who's at an advantage. The billion-dollar networks, so CNN, they're getting about the same views as OAN or Rebel News or something, networks that are comprised of a tenth as many people with less than a tenth of the budget, and their viewership is the same. Who's in an advantage here? It's the more streamlined network. All of the individuals there are personalities, not just pundits and producers. It's less centralized. It's more efficient. They don't need to throw 7 or 8 figures to a pundit who's famous for being famous because they happen to be on the right news slot. They don't need to spend that kind of money. That person has a merch line and a GoFundMe page or a Patreon or something like that. They're using Subscribestar, I hope, at this point. They're branching out onto uncensorable networks that really, they're not anything like old tech, including the missing link tech like Rumble. They're on Odyssey. They're on BitChute. They're making Substack articles instead of Medium articles. This scares Oliver Darcy. This scares CNN. It scares Fox, too, by the way. It scares all these people because it's much more interesting material anyway. Which would you rather watch? Some boring hair plug, cap-toothed moron pundit who makes $5 million a year and gets a script, gets paid to lie to you believably, and most of the time fails at that, or a network that is fully independent because it doesn't have to deal with the kind of advertising system that yesteryear's news relied upon. So I love this. You get kicked off DirecTV, OAN. By the way, when this happens, when you get banned off mainline tech, when they force off certain material, like YouTube has forced off a great proportion of the material that I could make on YouTube because it now would be against their TOS, especially with regards to certain political issues, certain social issues, certainly to medical issues. Well, that just gives me an opportunity to put it on other better sites, speak much more freely, say what I really want to say, and it'll be more entertaining because I'm doing that because I don't have to hold back. I don't have to watch what I say to the same degree that I do on YouTube. The same is true with media. OAN getting divested out of the on-demand service, well, it means you can be even more edgy. You can be like MTV was before they sold out or something. You could have people throwing baloney at strippers' asses, and it wouldn't run up against the TOS on most of these sites. So you can actually entertain people and also inform them without worrying about being censored. This is a censorship dog whistle, but they've been doing this for years and years anyway. Some people are up in arms like, oh my God, the censorship's getting worse. Yeah, okay, and the backlash is getting more and more vigorous. If you're not on new tech at this point, I don't even know what to tell you. That's about all. Peace out.